Hello, I'm here with Books Not Bombs. Today we'll be reading our third part of our three-part series of Food Not Bombs by C.T. Butler and Keith McHenry. We're starting on the chapter titled Stories. Food Not Bombs has participated in hundreds of events over the years, and each one was unique. We do not have space in this book to tell every story. Therefore, we have identified one peak event from 3 eras in our history. The Food Not Bombs free concert for disarmament on May 2, 1982, from the Cambridge Collective era, 1981 to 1982, the first American Peace Test, APT, Nevada Test Site, action on March 10th to 17th, 1988, from the Affinity Group era, 1984 to 1988, and the Labor Day arrests of Food Not Bombs, San Francisco and Golden Gate Park on September 5th, 1988. From the National Organizing era, 1988 to 1991. During the first few years, we were a collective with a totally shared economy, living and working cooperatively in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Later, we evolved into affinity groups of like-minded activists who lived close to each other and did the day-to-day Food Not Bombs work. Still later, we became a loose network of autonomous organizations all across the country. The following is a recollection of events that took place during each of these eras. The Cambridge Collective era, 1981 to 1982. On the day we had planned to hold the free concert for disarmament, we got up extra early. As we had every morning for the last year, the 2 members of the collective would leave the house with our 4 dog friends who also lived with us and pile into our 67 Dodge van. The first stop was always the bakery in Harvard Square. The manager there insisted we arrive at the door no earlier than 7:30 a.m. and no later than 7:35 a.m. exactly. If we were even a few minutes late, the manager would have already put the leftover muffins and bread in the trash compactor. During our first year, we missed only 5 days, and 3 of those had major snowstorms. As we were driving, we began to reminisce about the time we collected food for our first actions, the soup line at the First National Bank of Boston stockholders meeting, outside the Federal Reserve Bank in March 1981. As nuclear power protesters, we wanted to do street theater that would remind people of a 1930-style soup kitchen to highlight the waste of valuable resources on capital-intensive projects such as nuclear power, while many people in this country went hungry and homeless. At first, we thought we would have actors play the homeless, but then we realized we could get people who actually were homeless to participate and made an invitation we could distribute at Pine Street and other shelters. We collected day-old bread from a bakery and some fruit and vegetables from the local co-op on the morning of the stockholders meeting and cooked a huge pot of soup. We set up a table at the Federal Reserve Building, and to our surprise, over 100 people showed up for a meal. This action was sponsored by a task force of the Clamshell Alliance to highlight how the directors of the bank, the nuclear utilities, and the building contractors were all interlocked. That is, they were all the same people. We weren't sure we wouldn't be arrested, but we did it anyway. It was a tremendous success. Even some sympathetic stockholders stopped by and donated $1 or $2. Our second street theater action was on August 20th, 1981. Outside a weapons bazaar at Boston University. The night before, we spray painted the outline of dead bodies on the ground, stenciled mushroom clouds with the word "Today," and wheat pasted "War is Murder for Profit" posters along the route that the weapon buyers and sellers would take from their hotel to the conference hall. The day of the bazaar, we distributed free food and flyers protesting this profiteering from weapons of mass destruction. This literature also had the mushroom cloud stenciled on it, and we held signs that were also stenciled. Samuel Day of The Progressive wrote a great article about the contrast between the free meal outside and the $90 lunch he had with a general. He also mentioned that the general made sure that he didn't step on the spray-painted bodies. After reminiscing and collecting the bread at the bakery in Harvard Square, we proceeded to Fresh Pond, the only park in Cambridge where it was legal to allow dogs to run off the leash. Our 4 dog friends, Jasmine, Arrow, Sage, and Yoda, were very important members of the collective. They made sure we got up every morning and to do our food collection and take them for their walk at Fresh Pond. And they also played an important role in bringing the collective together in the first place. Jasmine had a litter of puppies in the summer of 1980. 3 of them were adopted by friends who at the time lived in different houses in different neighborhoods. But over the next year, these friends became closer, in part because of the relationship of the dogs, and eventually all moved in together as the founding members of the Food Not Bombs collective. Hence, Jasmine and 3 of her puppies ended up living together as well. And every day, someone in the collective would go with the dogs to Fresh Pond for a walk. Sometimes everyone would go for these walks, and we would spend the time thinking about and planning for the future of the collective. It was on one such walk that one of our most elaborate plans for a series of actions developed. Food Not Bombs planned a series of 3 protest marches from Cambridge City Hall to Draper Weapons Research Lab of MIT in the summer and fall of 1981. We designed these marches to highlight how the international politics of nuclear war directly affected local politics, specifically that the division of resources from human needs reduced services for the people of Cambridge. It was not a coincidence that our house was halfway between City Hall and Draper Lab. The first march was on Hiroshima Day, August 6th. Food Not Bombs provided food and organized a speak out in the triangle of the public land at the entrance to Draper Lab in the middle of the street to dramatize what would happen if a 1 megaton nuclear weapon hit Draper Lab. We burned a copy of the Boston telephone book, pointing out that all the people in it could be vaporized in less time than it took for the book to burn. The next march was on October 10th and was called Music in March to End the Arms Race. Again, we marched from City Hall to Draper Lab, but this time General Duffy, the president of Draper Lab, met with us in advance. Other groups protesting at Draper Lab had been arrested for stepping off the sidewalk into Draper Lab's property, and we were requesting permission to gather and serve food right in the courtyard on that property. We assured him we would be nonviolent and had a nice talk with him about peace and nuclear weapons. He assured us that he wanted peace as well, and that nuclear weapons were necessary for peace in our modern world. As we were in apparent agreement on the need for peace, General Duffy agreed to let us protest against nuclear weapons on Draper property, and so we did, with all the employees looking out the window at us and our banners, posters, and food table. Before the next march, which was called the Walk for Peace, we tabled in Brattle Square in the snow to educate Christmas shoppers about the dangers of nuclear weapons being developed right here in our town. At that time, in 1981, many people were not yet aware of the danger or that it was going on right in our backyard. We were very familiar to all the city councilors by this time, and we were able to have this walk co-sponsored by Cambridge City Council. On December 20th, 1981, it was only 4 degrees outside, and we marched from Cambridge Commons and past City Hall to Draper Lab anyway. To our amazement, 75 people showed up to march. We made a huge white dove out of bed sheets and sticks that took several people to carry, and this peace dove led the way. Our walk around Fresh Pond on that day of the free concert was invigorating. As usual, we were able to review our plans for the concert. From there, we drove to Bread and Circus, an organic food store where we loaded boxes of produce and buckets of tofu set aside for us. It never ceased to amaze us how much food we were able to recover. We had a network of several neighborhood grocery stores that we would visit, and while we made our rounds this morning, we got to talking about how this collection network had grown and how that allowed us to feed large numbers of people for very little money. This got us thinking about the first very large event we fed. The day before Halloween, October 30th, 1981, Vice President George Bush spoke to the stockholders of MIT. We had our first Food Not Bombs banner for this action, and we set up our food table. There were the usual speeches, and the crowd was several thousand people in costume. After the speeches, we marched into Massachusetts Avenue and stood outside the building where Bush was speaking. We chanted and beat on drums. We were so loud, he had to cut his talk short. We brought a puppet of Bush, which we burned in effigy, and someone burned an American flag. Soon the wooden police barricades became a bonfire in the center of the road, and people continued drumming, dancing, and chanting until after Bush had gone. We unloaded the produce and bread at the Food Not Bomb's house and started washing what we needed to cook. About 6 people were already cutting vegetables and stirring large pots of soup, and we had a whole crew just preparing food, while another crew assembled the stage and the sound systems at the park. The land of the younger self was also being created. This was a make-believe land for everyone who wanted to play like a child for the day. It was a bubble-making, face-painting, and creative play areas. Vendors with crystals, scarves, and tie-dyed clothes also displayed their wares. The food soon arrived and was placed with the literature table next to the stage when the music started. People gathered from all over the neighborhood. Everyone came. The concert started with Donna Hammersgram performing on stage and an exhibition of martial arts on the far side of the park. People of every size, shape, and color came to the call of the music. As the reggae band One People rocked, people danced and had a great time. Lost Time and Inity, Annie Lou and Company, and Jane Albert all performed. By the time the art of black dance and music was to perform at the end of the day, it had become cloudy and started to rain, but it was still a tremendous success for all involved. A peaceful concert at which thousands of neighbors danced and had fun, with plenty to eat, all for free from Food Not Bombs. In the days following this concert, our organizing focused toward building momentum for a giant disarmament rally on June 12, 1982, in New York City's Central Park. On May 2nd, we served food on the Rainbow Warrior at a press conference related to this upcoming event. This was the same Rainbow Warrior the French government bombed and sank when Greenpeace protested nuclear testing in the South Seas. Much of the food for the New Englanders for Peace rally in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on May 16th was shipped by the Rainbow Warrior. And at this rally outside the fence at Pease Air Force Base, we prepared and cooked food in the middle of a big field with only a hose for running water. We served an incredible number of meals, and we brought so much food that at the end of the day we gave out bags of leftover fresh produce. During the last song, people danced holding carrots to the sun. The whole week before the June 12th International March for Nuclear Disarmament in New York, Food Not Bombs staffed tables on the Avenue of the Americas from mid-morning to 2 a.m. the next morning. We met activists from all over the world, and as everybody knows, over 1 million people attended that rally to protest nuclear weapons. When asked by a reporter if this large demonstration would make a difference in U.S. policy, Alexander Haig, Secretary of Defense at the time, responded, "Let them protest all they want, as long as they pay their taxes." The Affinity Group Era, 1984 to 1988. In the spring of 1988, the San Francisco Food Not Bombs, which had just started, and the Boston Food Not Bombs met in the dark of night under the desert sky in Nevada. We were at an encampment called Peace Camp, and activists from all over the world were meeting here to take nonviolent direct action against the nuclear weapons testing going on across the desert. Sponsored by American Peace Test, this would be the first joint action by Food Not Bombs groups from across the country. The next morning, we loaded equipment into our truck and drove from Peace Camp to the main gate. We set up, while the Wackenhuts, a private army hired to protect the test site, amassed before the gate. They looked as though they wanted to arrest us any minute. However, we knew it was still early and the action had not yet begun. We prepared a breakfast of miso soup and rice and beans for the activists who would soon gather there, and with the adrenaline running high, we thought back to a similar event at which Food Not Bombs fed large numbers of activists preparing to challenge government war-making by nonviolent direct action at the Federal Building in Boston. In the spring of 1985, the U.S.-backed government in El Salvador was massacring civilians, and the Contras were terrorizing Nicaragua. Congress was preparing to vote on sending still more tax dollars on these murderers. So the Pledge of Resistance, a national organization committed to resisting U.S. military intervention in Central America, was planning action to stop further bloodshed. Many of the volunteers in Food Not Bombs were active in the Pledge of Resistance. If Congress voted to send more aid, we planned to shut down by occupation the JFK Federal Building 24 hours after that vote. Because we would have only short notice, Food Not Bombs took a risk that the vote would happen on May 6th, and we printed thousands of posters announcing May 7th action. The vote did occur on May 6th. The pledge consented to the action, and our posters hit the street. We arrived the next day with our food and literature tables, and the crowd quickly grew. Before long, over 500 people had entered the lobby of the federal building, and thousands more were chanting and showing their anger outside in the plaza. People sat on the floor and filled every inch of the lobby, as others climbed over the protesters to get into the building. The protesters sang and spoke out against Contra aid. The police tried to convince us to leave, then threatened us with arrest. However, we were solid in our resistance and refused to leave. A very powerful speak out was held by the protesters while occupying the building, and when the building was closed at 6 p.m., the police started the arrests. Outside, supporters cheered, and Food Not Bombs continued feeding the people. Over 500 activists were arrested that day in one of Boston's most successful nonviolent direct actions, and our food support helped make it possible for the protesters to stay at that building all day and most of the night. After a nervous morning preparing miso soup under the intense scrutiny of the Wackenhuts, the first activists gathered at the main gate. There was uncertainty in the air about what the Wackenhuts' reaction would be, as we were in the desert far away from public eye. Drinking hot miso, a cold, anxious affinity group huddled around our table while building up the courage to act. Busloads of workers were beginning to rush past through the gate into the test site, and we could see many more buses in the distance speeding towards us down the highway. Suddenly, an affinity group walked into the road, and the string of buses came to a halt. The Wackenhuts ran out and started roughly grabbing and dragging the blockaders off the road. But as soon as they cleared the first affinity group, another filled the street. Before long, 30 or 40 vehicles were backed up from the gate, up the ramp, and into the highway. Some were arrested and placed in a pen awaiting transportation to the country jail in Beatty, where they would be booked and released. Others were just beaten and thrown from the roadway. But our action was making the busloads of workers late to their jobs of preparing nuclear weapons tests. And just like at the Seabrook nuclear power plant, the cost of nuclear testing was slowly rising. The blockade continued for over an hour as many affinity groups took over the street. Later, all of us were excited about the success of the first day of our week-long action as we cleaned and packed up our table and headed back to Peace Camp across the highway. We reflected on the wide variety of actions with which Food Not Bombs had been involved over the past few years. The Boston Tea Party on October 29, 1986 was a funny example. During the time just before this, we were confronted by a crazy array of issues. Reagan had kicked the general level of national repression to new heights by demanding widespread mandatory drug testing, using the war on drugs as an excuse. One of the members of Food Not Bombs worked as a technician in a lab responsible for drug testing and knew just how unreliable those tests really were. Innocent people were losing their jobs, and the media was awash in stories about the menace of drugs and the need to cast aside civil liberties to win this war at any cost. It occurred to us that political activists would make an easy target for this hysteria, so we planned to respond to this repression by flooding the White House with urine samples. However, we dropped this idea for fear we would all end up in prison, but it was too good to be forgotten. And several weeks later, we were back to planning the Boston Tea Party at the Federal Building. We designed a flyer announcing a piss-in on October 29th, but because of the war on drugs hysteria, we didn't include a phone number so that no one would get harassed. We obtained a supply of jars like the ones used in hospitals to collect urine, and our flyer had the White House address on it so people could mail their urine to Reagan from the privacy of their own home. For those who came to the Federal Building protest, we had jars and printed address labels so they could mail the samples directly from the protests. We mailed numerous jars of urine to the White House that day, though we never really knew how much urine we mailed nationally. However, Abby Hoffman heard about our action and mentioned it in his book, Steal This Urine Test. Only the White House really knows the success of our piss-in urine testing protest action. We could see our results in the Nevada desert. However, the next day, an ad hoc affinity group formed during breakfast. Composed of members of Food Not Bombs and several others, they named themselves the Jackrabbit. This affinity group planned to escalate tactics by attempting to cross the desert undetected and enter the town of McHenry, a city consisting entirely of technicians and scientists devoted to nuclear weapons testing, about 8 miles into the test site from the main gate. At the daily Peace Camp strategy meeting the night before, the leaders had discouraged backcountry actions like walking across the desert to McHenry because they felt it was too dangerous. The authorities had told them anyone caught entering McHenry would be charged with a felony and face 6 months in jail. We felt that if they didn't want us there, then it was exactly where we should go. Besides, what were they hiding? So the Jackrabbit Affinity Group piled into a van and took the highway north to a pass between two prehistoric treeless mountain ranges. By now it was daylight, and we feared we might be seen, even up in the mountains, by one of the surveillance helicopters. When the highway patrol was out of sight, the driver pulled off the road, and 7 of us jumped out of the van, ran down the slope, and climbed under the barbed wire fence that marked the boundary of the test site. We carried water, fruit, and of course carrots, and we raced straight up the side of the steep, rocky cliff. Our path wove just north of the crest of the ridge, so we would be out of the Wagon Hut site, down in the valley by the main gate. The flowers and wildlife up among the rocks were beautiful and brightly colored, and that inspired moving conversations about the contrast between this beauty and the nuclear destruction occurring right at the end of this mountain range. As we walked, we would stop and place stones in the shape of peace symbols. It was so beautiful, we wanted to forget that our presence on this ridge was a protest against nuclear testing and just enjoy our hiking trip, but we were rudely reminded when a surveillance helicopter flew overhead. We quickly jumped down into a ledge behind some high rocks. The Wagon Huts and the helicopter didn't seem to see us, but we weren't too sure. We decided to head for the valley floor and get as close to McHenry as possible before we were caught. When we got to the valley floor, we found a marker for an old ground zero capped in clay. We put in at the center a giant peace symbol made of rocks. As we made the long hike across the desert to McHenry, it became clear we had not yet been spotted. During the afternoon, we happened upon a building that seemed like it was supposed to represent a house just outside the blast area, and several hours later, we came to a white water tank sitting at the edge of the town of McHenry. Not far away, we could see 2 guys in a pickup who looked like they were hiding behind the tank and drinking beers. We were trying to decide what we should do when we got to McHenry when several white pickups, trucks, and vans sped over to where we were. Men with machine guns jumped out, surrounded us, and ordered us to lie on our stomachs. Then they frisked us, handcuffed us, and put us in one of the vans. As we were being transported out of McHenry, we passed an amazing array of Star Wars weapons. We commented to each other about them, but were told by the guards to look straight ahead and not look at or talk about these weapons. We all stared at the weapons anyway, and talked about how their sinister appearance was a clear reflection of the mentality of those who thought that building nuclear bombs was a good idea. Just like prisoners of war, we finally were ordered out of the van and marched at gunpoint into the cage, a large fenced-in area of the desert, divided into men and women section near the main gate. It was cold and getting dark, and our food had been confiscated. Once imprisoned and without food, our conversation naturally turned to protests that involved fasting. The Veterans' Fast for Life came to mind. This was one of Food Not Bomb's most empowering events that we ever had the privilege to attend. Veterans all over the country planned to fast and hold rallies. In Boston, they made an encampment on the Boston Common with tents and banners, and they were highly visible and outspoken. With our biggest banner, we went to the Common to support their protest against the secret U.S. wars in Central America. However, this time we didn't bring our food, because we wanted to honor the veterans who were fasting. Because we were well known by the people living on the street around the Common by that time, they would come up to us and ask where our food was. We told them about the fast, and they were shocked. They had never seen Food Not Bomb's tables without food. Back in Nevada, as we sat in the cage, our supporters outside the main gate were busy. We could see a crowd that had gathered at the main gate earlier that day. More blockade actions across the road had resulted in many arrests and consequently more people in the cage. Food Not Bombs had been there feeding the crowd all day. Now that the day was coming to an end, the supporters who remained were drumming and dancing in celebration of another successful day of protest. Suddenly, inside the cage, oranges and apples started falling from the sky. We looked across the desert to our friends outside the fence, and they were throwing food to us from this incredible distance. Then, spontaneously, a person from the crowd high-jumped over the fence and came running toward the cage. With the Wackenhuts in hot pursuit, this mysterious person ran up to the cage and climbed into our prison before the Wackenhuts could grab him. On his back was a bag of food for us, while we ate and waited for the sheriff's department to take us to Beatty for booking. We told the story about another time the police had tried to stop us from feeding people during our protests outside the World Series at Fenway Park in Kenmore Square, Boston. The victories of the Boston Red Sox looked like they might be a big loss for the poor and the homeless of Kenmore Square. The local business association was seeing dollar signs with each Red Sox win. The bums, punks, and other undesirables would have to be cleared from the square if business was to succeed. The Business Association, on the advice of the Boston Police, sent out a newsletter demanding that merchants lock their dumpsters, turn in those businesses that did not, and post signs asking customers not to give money to beggars, and report all sightings of undesirables, punks, and bums to the police. They were encouraged to make notes of the time and location of each incident, and if possible, get a photo to include with their notes to the police. In a few days, the cops were telling the homeless to leave town or face arrest. We wrote a letter of protest to the Business Association, the police, and the newspapers, pointing out that homeless people had the same rights as everyone else, and this discrimination was leading down a dangerous road. Who would be the next victim of this kind of fascist logic? Food Not Bombs started sponsoring Welcome to Kenmore meetings with free food in the park, with the idea of introducing the business people to the homeless people who lived beneath the overpass, inside the doorways, and in the back alleys of Kenmore Square. The press came, the homeless came, but of course the Business Association members did not. After several very visible demonstrations and embarrassing press coverage that exposed their illegal intentions, the Business Association withdrew the letter and quietly dropped the issue. For most reports, the only increase of robbery in Kenmore Square during this time came from the businesses that jacked up their prices to cash in on the World Series. They did not drop the issue in Nevada. Ultimately, we were all taken to the town of Tonopah in the sheriff's buses and booked there. This was a 3-hour drive from the main gate, one way, with the 100 of arrestees and hundreds more supporters arriving to retrieve them. We overran this small town out in the middle of the desert. There were so many of us, we completely consumed all of the food at one restaurant. The people working there that night could not recall ever seeing a line at the door, not even on New Year's Eve, their traditional biggest night of the year. We broke the record for their busiest night ever. It was like one big party all over town for several hours, without any incidents. Finally, after everyone was released from the school gym where the booking took place and almost everyone had a hot meal or cold drink, we managed to find rides for all and headed back to Peace Camp. The National Organizing Era, 1988 to 1981. By the summer of 1988, there were Food Not Bombs groups operating in Boston, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., but the events that actually catapulted Food Not Bombs into the national and even international spotlight was the Labor Day arrests in Golden Gate Park. The following stories were about the 4 weeks preceding Labor Day, during which Food Not Bombs volunteers had been repeatedly arrested for feeding the homeless. By Labor Day, support had grown to the point where over 700 people came to the Golden Gate Park, along with hundreds of homeless folk, police, and press. The event made the news all over the world. The past several weeks had been crazy, with reporters interviewing us, city officials supposedly offering us a building for cooking and serving. It actually wasn't available or theirs to give away in the first place, and the press misrepresenting everything so that we look uncooperative and implying that we had sinister intentions. And, of course, there was all the arrests to deal with. Labor Day was a Monday holiday, so we needed to cook an extra large amount of food to serve at the lunch. Each successive Monday, we had been attracting larger numbers of homeless and supporters, not to mention police, in response to all the press coverage and controversy of the previous arrests. Thinking back to how innocently we stumbled into this bizarre situation is mind-numbing. Although we had been serving free food in Golden Gate Park every Monday since May, the police stopped by our table on the first Monday in August and told us we couldn't serve food there. We told them we believed we did not need a permit to give away free food, that it was a constitutionally protected activity, but that we had written the Parks Department anyway. We told the police we had hand-delivered a letter on July 11th asking for a permit, but had not yet received an answer. The cops left, but as we loaded the last boxes at the end of our day, 2 cops came up to us and demanded to know, "What are you doing here? And do you have a permit to be here?" We told them we were just leaving. At that point, the police started giving us tickets for things we weren't even doing, like not having our seatbelts on, driving with a broken taillight, and other things we couldn't even figure out. We were legally parked with the engine off, and we were getting moving violations. We knew we were in trouble. While signing the citation, the person sitting in the driver's seat was punched in the face by one of the cops for making inappropriate comments. The cop opened the door of our truck, pulled him out, threw him on the hood of the vehicle, and handcuffed him. A police wagon arrived, and he was taken to jail. An hour later, he was released without charges. We realized next Monday regular lunch might be visited again by these same 2 cops, and we felt apprehensive as we cooked our huge pots of miso soup. We loaded the truck, drove to Height and Stanyon, and unloaded with the help of those who had come to eat, setting up along the sidewalk. A line formed and we began serving food. Within minutes, police vans and cops on horses started coming from every direction. 2 long lines of riot police with riot sticks and helmets marched out of the woods and surrounded the tables and volunteers. The captain in charge ordered them to arrest the servers. 9 of us were handcuffed and led to an awaiting police wagon, but the energy in the police van was high. Food Not Bombs could be arrested for serving free food in a public park. Could this be the start of America's own Gandhian salt marches? After finishing lunch preparations on Labor Day, we again loaded the truck with food. We didn't want to drive directly to Golden Gate Park because we were afraid we might have all our food confiscated before we even started. We unloaded the food at different locations around Buena Vista Park, a smaller park about 8 blocks down Height Street from where we normally served. We moved the truck out of the area so the police would be unable to tow it as a form of harassment. Musicians and speakers addressed the crowd of several hundred who had answered our call for help to protect our rights to share free food with the people who needed it, and everyone was invited to help carry the boxes of food, literature, and picnic blankets. Our tables had been confiscated by the police. Down Height Street to Golden Gate Park, those who were not carrying food or equipment were encouraged to bang on pots and other noisemakers as we marched. That was a popular suggestion, so off we went chanting, "Food not bombs! Food not bombs!" as we poured into Height Street. The crowd had swelled to several hundred and filled one corner of the Golden Gate Park. Food Not Bombs volunteers spread out long blue tarps on the ground and set out food. But when dozens of people started serving the crowd, riot police, clutching their nightsticks with the plastic visors of their helmets pulled down, moved into the park. At one point, a cop began to pound a server with his club. A Channel 5 camera operator was filming this when the supervising police lieutenant calmly walked up behind him and knocked him to the ground, cutting the operator's face on the camera. The police tried to cordon off areas by marching around the field, but the food serving kept moving. It became impossible for the police to take control of any ground, and soon the protesters were marching behind the lines of riot police, dancing and chanting in a parody of the attempt to control them. One line of protesters wove into a circle, and everyone held hands and sang, "Give peace a chance." 54 servers were ultimately arrested, but little did we know this was not going to be the end of a wholesale police attacks against the San Francisco Food Not Bombs. We never would have guessed that the mayor would want to meet with us to negotiate an end to this situation, but the arrests were rapidly becoming a political embarrassment. City officials obviously had made a big mistake when they ordered the arrest of Food Not Bombs. Support was coming in from around the country and growing. People were outraged. It was almost unimaginable that anyone in this country would be arrested for feeding the poor in a city park. The mayor, the chief of police, the city attorney, other city officials, representatives from the ACLU, and community activists met together to negotiate. Food Not Bombs correspondence with the city showed that the police were using the Parks Department to create a problem that did not exist. There were no permits needed for this kind of activity, and the city looked stupid. We decided at this meeting to meet again and the next day. We also agreed not to talk to the press and that there would be no more arrests until we reached a settlement. On the way to the second meeting, however, a Food Not Bombs negotiator was arrested for hugging a homeless Vietnam vet who was at that moment planning to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge because he was sick of living in the park. After 45 minutes, the police released him, and he was able to attend the meeting only because it started late. The Food Not Bombs representatives decided they were not willing to continue the negotiations because the city had proved itself untrustworthy by arresting a negotiator on his way to a meeting and by releasing a press statement the night before that was derogatory to the Food Not Bombs. We told the mayor we would continue serving free food in the park and we would leave it up to him to decide whether to order more arrests, and he freaked out. He was not used to being held accountable or having his authority questioned. He needed a way out, so he offered us a 6-week temporary permit. Even though it made him late to opening night at the opera, he held a press conference to announce this settlement and called Food Not Bombs pioneers in the efforts to end homelessness and hunger. In the summer of 1989, the homeless in several cities across the nation created communities for support that they called tent cities. Tent cities became major actions for Food Not Bombs in New York and in San Francisco. These tent cities brought the humanity of the poor to the public eye. Mayors in both cities were in crisis because of the homeless situation, which was getting worse, and because of violent attacks against the homeless by frustrated taxpayers. They had no solutions to poverty because they were unwilling to address the fundamental failures of centralized authority. This resulted in the mayors highlighting their own inadequate solutions to this dire situation. As the food tables in San Francisco, the homeless told stories about how the night before police came into the park, beat people, and destroyed their camps. Some were hauled off to jail. One night, the fire department came and sprayed them with water. On another night, the police drove into the park, shone floodlights on everyone, and threatened them over a loudspeaker. After 3 days of this, people asked us to help stop the police attacks. We moved our daily noontime food service from United Nations Plaza to City Hall. We started serving at 5 o'clock p.m. on June 28th and served hot meals 24 hours a day. The homeless had created a tent city across the street from City Hall in Civic Center Plaza. Tent City created hope and encouraged self-empowerment. The mayor would threaten to send in the police, but the community would rally together. After the mayor ordered that the residents of the park could not use tents or sleep there at any time, there was a spontaneous march to his office, where a giant Food Not Bombs banner was hung from his balcony. On July 12th, the Police Activities League moved a carnival complete with bumper cars and Ferris wheel into the Civic Center Plaza. The fair was named after Emperor Norton, San Francisco's most famous homeless person of the 1800s. When we saw the police, we feared we might be arrested to make room for the carnival, so we placed several of our buckets of soup out of sight. On Thursday, July 13th at 6 o'clock p.m., the police moved in, arrested several people, and took the soup we were serving. As soon as the police left, we were back with more soup and bread, and when they walked by again, they found us serving and arrested us again. The fact that we were able to bounce right back several times was a real embarrassment, the kind that they would feel many more times in the coming years. At noon the next day, in response to the arrests, a large rally developed at City Hall. Food Not Bombs brought more food for lunch, and one group of people inspired by the Tiananmen Square protest that May came with a 15-foot-tall goddess of free food complete with a shopping cart in one hand and a chariot in the other. Again, riot police were in the wings. When the giant Food Not Bombs banner was unfurled on the city steps of the City Hall, the people holding it were arrested. After spending the afternoon locked in a police wagon, those arrests were taken to Northern Police Station and were read a court order banning free food distribution. One person was then taken to Superior Court, where he got to defend himself. He called the court order morally incomprehensible, and he said it's going to become burdensome to taxpayers in San Francisco because hundreds and hundreds of us will be arrested. We will in no way comply with this act of judicial terrorism. This statement would eventually become a reality. Food Not Bombs continued to exert its right to serve free food every day. Food Not Bombs continued to be arrested and came right back with more food as soon as the police left. After the arrests on Labor Day in Golden Gate Park, we all danced around what food we had saved from the police. Then those of us remaining had to get out of the area without getting arrested. We went up height 1 block and several cops on Honda motorcycles raced up to several people about 30 feet behind us. The police smacked them to the ground with their sticks, then dragged them into the street and arrested them. We thought we might be next, so we ran up a side street and continued winding up Buena Vista Hill. After we crossed the hill, we walked through the back streets until we got to the Channel 4 television station. We went on the air shortly after we arrived and were asked our reason for continuing to serve free food even though we faced arrest. We explained that serving free food is everyone's right and is an unregulated activity protected by the Constitution. We then encouraged everyone to stand up for his or her rights. That brought the interview to a close. Although the city finally issued us a health permit after these arrests, it wasn't finished trying to stop the San Francisco Food Not Bombs from distributing free food. We were harassed and arrested again in the summer of 1990. This pattern of harassment continues to this day, but during all this, and partly because of it, Food Not Bombs has continued to grow and to expand its program. The attention and credibility the arrests brought us were invaluable. Update to Revised Edition. The International Organizing Era, 1992 to 1999. Since this book first appeared in 1992, Food Not Bombs has blossomed from groups in around 15 communities to over 175 chapters around the world. We are one of the largest all-volunteer free food distribution organizations in North America, yet we continue to be little known as we are routinely ignored by the media. Since this book first appeared, though we haven't been ignored by the police. In San Francisco alone, there have been over 700 arrests since 1992, as well as numerous police beatings for doing Food Not Bombs, or for sharing food in protest of war and poverty. And police have tried to stop chapters from sharing food in several other communities in North America and Europe, but the movement has continued to grow despite continued repression. In 1992, Food Not Bombs held its first international gathering in San Francisco. About 70 people attended. Food Not Bombs volunteers from Boston, Massachusetts, San Francisco, Berkeley, Long Beach, and Santa Cruz, California, Seattle, Washington, and Victoria, and Vancouver, British Columbia spent several days talking about their local efforts, meeting processes, and intergroups structure. Those attending the gathering also participated in protest against 500 years of conquest of the Americas by Europeans. They fed the protesters at Aquatic Park when Indian activists stopped the landing of the official Columbus Day delegation and at the anti-Columbus Day rally at Civic Center Plaza. Some activists also distributed the Columbus Day parade on Columbus Avenue in the North Beach area. By 1997, there had been over 1,000 arrests for sharing free vegetarian food in San Francisco. Our trucks and vans were towed dozens of times for transporting free food in violation of a court order. Many volunteers were beaten, required medical care, and faced felony charges. Women and men alike were thrown to the ground by the police, their head ground into the pavement and arms torn and twisted. A performance artist named Paradox was choked and almost suffocated to death when police snapped his neck during his act. Robert Norris Kahn was the only Food Not Bombs volunteer convicted of sharing free food without a permit, and he spent 27 days in county jail. These are just a few of the brave, hard-working people that faced arrest and police violence for volunteering with Food Not Bombs. The list of Food Not Bombs volunteers who have been beaten includes dozens of others. Keith McHenry was beaten 13 times, was held on $100,000 bail, spent over 450 days in jail, and faced life in prison because of arrests for handing out free food. He was one of the first white people to face the California three strikes law, which has a penalty of 25 years to life. He was hospitalized several times after being beaten by the police and had surgery to repair his face after the police clubbed him between the eyes. The police and other communities have also attempted to stop local Food Not Bombs groups. Food Not Bombs chapters in Whittier, San Jose, and Arcata, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Elgin, Illinois, Houston, Texas, Biloxi, Mississippi, Tampa, Florida, Salt Lake City, Utah, Washington, D.C., Quebec City, Montreal, and Edmonton, Canada, Berlin, Cologne, Germany, and Tokyo, Japan have all been harassed by the police. Please forgive us if we missed any groups. In 1995, Food Not Bombs held its second international gathering. This time, as many as 600 people may have attended. The gathering was held in San Francisco during the 50th anniversary celebration of the founding of the United Nations. We were arrested for sharing free food at UN Plaza near the monument of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Amnesty International and the United Nations Human Rights Commission came to our aid. Amnesty International wrote letters to the governor of California, the mayor of San Francisco, and the district attorney stating that if we were convicted, we would be considered prisoners of conscience and they would work for our unconditional release. Our second international gathering had a free radio station, and there were workshops on banner making, sexism, racism, composting, cooking, consensus, future actions, puppet making, and so on. This large, energetic gathering well illustrated our growth. By 1995, there were over 100 Food Not Bombs chapters. Food Not Bombs activists helped start numerous free radio stations, info shops, community gardens, and Homes Not Jails groups. We had become a worldwide social movement. By the millennium, Food Not Bombs had 175 chapters scattered around the globe. The 20 years since Food Not Bombs began in Boston in 1980 have been difficult but rewarding, and they continue to be rewarding. We couldn't be more excited when we learn that there's a new chapter in Poland, the Philippines, Brazil, or Finland. We were overwhelmed with joy when we saw the East Bay Food Not Bombs book. It was inspiring to see the recent photo on an AOL email listing of Melbourne Food Not Bombs sharing food in Australia. Just when we thought that Dallas Food Not Bombs was history, we got an email detailing their distribution schedule. When Keith was helping the local group share food in the front of Brixton, England Library, 2 people stopped by to eat. They were from Prague, Czech Republic, Food Not Bombs, and were on their way to visit the Melbourne, Australia chapter. About a year later, the Melbourne website announced a benefit CD produced by both the Prague and Melbourne chapters. We could have never dreamed that our little idea would grow into a worldwide movement. It's our hope that this new edition of Food Not Bombs will trigger the start of another 175 groups. A movement that lasts 20 years has the potential to encourage some very positive social change. This movement has such a rich foundation that its future might include actions far beyond our present activities. Because Food Not Bombs was intentionally created with few boundaries, its future is limited only by your imagination. Since its inception, thousands of people have experienced the joy of sharing free food and ideas with Food Not Bombs. The first time you volunteer with Food Not Bombs will probably change your life. It certainly changed ours. C.T. Butler and Keith McHenry. At this point, there's actually thousands of chapters worldwide. Thank you for listening to Food Not Bombs by C.T. Butler and Keith McHenry.